The unexpected find. Amir Johnson trudged down the cracked pavement of his neighborhood, his threadbare backpack slung over his narrow shoulders. At just 13 years old, Amir carried the weight of the world on his small frame. The air was crisp with the bite of early autumn, and the colorful leaves that littered the sidewalk danced with every gust of wind. Despite the lively scene around him, Amir's mind was heavy with thoughts of home. His older brother, Malik, was trying his best to hold their tiny family together, but it wasn't easy. Their parents had passed away in a car accident 3 years ago, leaving Malik, then only 18, to raise Amir. At first, they managed with the little life insurance money left behind. But as the months dragged on, the money dwindled, and their situation grew dire. Now, Malik worked 2 low-paying jobs, and their once cozy home had become a haven for problems. As Amir rounded the corner to his street, something unusual caught his eye. Amid the swirl of fallen leaves lay a wallet, thick, leather, and unmistakably expensive-looking. His heart skipped a beat as he bent down to pick it up. Amir turned the wallet over in his hands, his fingers brushing against its fine material. It felt heavy, almost unnaturally so. He hesitated for a moment before flipping it open. His eyes widened as he took in the sight before him. Neat stacks of crisp $100 bills nestled inside. There must have been thousands of dollars in the wallet, more money than Amir had ever seen in his life. For a moment, he could only stare, his mind racing with the possibilities. A new pair of shoes, groceries that didn't come from the discount aisle, maybe even enough to pay off some of the bills that piled up on their kitchen counter. But then, tucked behind the cash, he noticed something else, a driver's license. The picture showed an older man with a kind face framed by neatly combed gray hair. The name printed below read Mr. Henry Carlton. Amir's stomach growled loudly, breaking his train of thought. His pockets were empty, and the last meal he had was a small bowl of cereal that morning. The thought of keeping even just a little of the money tempted him for a fleeting moment. But a voice, his mother's voice, stern and loving, echoed in his mind. Always do the right thing, no matter how hard it feels. He swallowed hard and closed the wallet. His hands trembled as he slipped it into his backpack. He didn't know who this Mr. Carlton was or how he was going to find him. But Amir was certain of one thing. He had to return the wallet. As he walked home, the weight of the wallet in his backpack felt almost as heavy as his thoughts. Part of him worried about what Malik might say if he found out Amir didn't keep the money. But deep down, Amir felt proud of his decision. It wasn't every day you got the chance to do the right thing in a big way. When he reached their small rundown house, Amir paused on the porch. The muffled sound of voices carried through the thin walls. His heart sank. The men were back. These weren't friends or neighbors. They were trouble. A few months ago, Malik had made the mistake of trusting the wrong people. 3 men, claiming they needed a place to stay just for a night or two, had wormed their way into their home. Now, they treated the house as their own, eating their food, making messes, and bringing an air of danger that made Amir's stomach churn every time he saw them. With a deep breath, Amir pushed open the door. The smell of cigarette smoke and cheap beer hit him instantly. The 3 men were sprawled across the living room, their loud laughter grating against Amir's nerves. Malik stood in the kitchen, his back to the chaos. He was washing dishes, his shoulders tense, and his movements hurried. "Hey, Amir," Malik said without turning around. His voice was tight, forced. "Hey," Amir replied softly. He slipped past the living room, careful not to draw attention to himself, and headed to his small bedroom. Once inside, he locked the door and sank onto his bed. He pulled the wallet from his backpack and stared at it again. Tomorrow, he decided, he would find Mr. Carlton and return it. As he lay down that night, his thoughts turned to prayer. "God," he whispered, his hands clasped tightly, "please help us. Help Malik, and help me do the right thing with this wallet." For the first time in a long while, Amir fell asleep with a strange sense of hope stirring in his chest. Little did he know, the events set into motion by his small act of honesty would change his life forever. A house of secrets. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the thin curtains of Amir's small bedroom, casting faint streaks of gold across his walls. He woke up with a start, the memory of the wallet jolting him fully awake. For a moment, he sat on the edge of his bed, clutching it tightly and staring at the faded wallpaper. Today was the day he would return it. Amir dressed quickly, slipping on his worn sneakers. He grabbed the wallet, tucking it safely into his backpack. As he opened his door, the house was eerily quiet. The three men were still asleep, their snores echoing faintly from the living room. Malik was nowhere in sight, probably at his early morning shift. The house always felt heavier when the men were there, as though their very presence had tainted the air. They never left for long, lounging around during the day and occasionally disappearing at night for mysterious errands. Amir tiptoed down the narrow hallway, avoiding the creaky spots in the floorboards. He passed the living room, glancing cautiously at the three figures sprawled on the couches. One of them stirred, muttering in his sleep, and Amir froze. His heart pounded in his chest as he waited, every second stretching out painfully. But the man only shifted and rolled over, resuming his loud snoring. Amir released a shaky breath and moved quickly toward the front door. Once outside, the cool morning air hit his face, and he felt a small measure of relief. He tightened the straps of his backpack and began walking, his destination clear in his mind. He had memorized the address on the driver's license, 425 Lincoln Street. It was about a mile away, in a part of town Amir had only seen from afar, the kind of neighborhood with big houses, trimmed lawns, and gates that looked like they belonged in movies. As he walked, he couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. On one hand, he was nervous. What would Mr. Carlton think of him? Would he be suspicious? On the other hand, Amir felt a strange sense of purpose. Returning the wallet felt like a small step towards something good, a way to prove to himself, and maybe even to Malik, that they were still the people their parents had raised them to be. The streets changed as Amir approached Lincoln Street. The buildings grew taller, the sidewalks cleaner. The houses were bigger, their lawns meticulously landscaped. It was a stark contrast to Amir's neighborhood, where the paint peeled off walls and weeds overtook yards. Finally, he reached the address. He stopped in front of the house, staring in awe. It was enormous, with tall, arched windows and a driveway that seemed to stretch forever. The gates were black iron, their intricate designs gleaming in the sunlight. A golden plaque on the stone pillar beside them read, "Carlton." Amir hesitated, suddenly overwhelmed by the sheer size of the place. His hand trembled as he reached out and pressed the intercom button. A crackling sound followed, and then a voice. "Yes. Who is it?" Amir cleared his throat, his voice small and hesitant. Hi. My name's Amir. I found a wallet yesterday. It belongs to Mr. Carlton. I just wanted to return it." There was a pause, and then the gates buzzed and swung open. Amir swallowed hard and walked up the long driveway, his heart thundering in his chest. The garden surrounding the house was like nothing Amir had ever seen. Vibrant flowers of every color lined the paths, and a fountain gurgled softly in the center. Birds chirped from the trees, and everything looked so perfect it almost didn't feel real. As Amir reached the massive front door, it opened before he could knock. A man stood in the doorway, tall and imposing, but with an air of kindness about him. His gray hair was neatly combed, and his sharp suit looked like it cost more than Amir's entire house. "Hello," the man said, his voice warm and welcoming. "You must be Amir." Amir nodded, suddenly shy. He reached into his backpack and pulled out the wallet, holding it out with both hands. "I found this yesterday, sir. I wanted to make sure you got it back." The man's eyes widened in surprise as he took the wallet. He opened it, his expression softening as he checked its contents. Then he looked back at Amir, a smile spreading across his face. "Amir, you've done something remarkable," Mr. Carlton said. "Not many people would return a wallet like this, especially one with so much money inside. You're an honest young man." Amir felt his cheeks grow warm at the compliment. He looked down at his worn sneakers, unsure of what to say. "Please come inside," Mr. Carlton said, stepping aside. "Let me thank you properly." Amir hesitated, glancing over his shoulder as though someone might catch him, but the temptation to see what the inside of such a grand house looked like was too strong. "Okay," he said quietly, stepping inside. The house was even more impressive than he had imagined. The floors were polished marble, and a chandelier glittered overhead, casting rainbow-like patterns on the walls. Paintings hung in ornate frames, and the air smelled faintly of flowers and something sweet. Mr. Carlton led Amir to a sitting room, where a maid appeared with a tray of tea and cookies. Amir perched on the edge of a plush armchair, feeling out of place but too curious to care. "Tell me about yourself, Amir," Mr. Carlton said as he poured tea into delicate china cups. "Where do you live? Do you have family nearby?" Amir hesitated. He wasn't used to sharing much about his life, especially with strangers. But there was something about Mr. Carlton's kind demeanor that made him want to open up. "I live a few blocks away," Amir said, keeping his voice low. "With my older brother, Malik. It's just the two of us." Mr. Carlton nodded, his expression sympathetic. "That must be difficult. You're very brave to manage so much at your age." Amir looked down at the tea in his hands. "It's not just us," he admitted after a moment. "There are other people in our house. They're not supposed to be there, but they won't leave. They're dangerous." Mr. Carlton's face grew serious. "Dangerous how?" Amir hesitated, unsure if he should say more. But then he thought about how long he and Malik had been living in fear and how Mr. Carlton might be able to help. "They talk about things they've stolen," Amir said quietly. "Sometimes they have guns. My brother's too scared to call the police. We don't know what to do." For a long moment, Mr. Carlton didn't speak. Then he leaned forward, his eyes full of determination. "Amir," he said gently, "you were brave enough to bring me this wallet, even when you could have kept it for yourself. Now, I need you to be brave again. I think I can help you and your brother, but I'll need to make a few calls first. Can you trust me?" Amir swallowed hard, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. But there was something about Mr. Carlton's words that made him feel a spark of hope. "I trust you," Amir said softly. "Good," Mr. Carlton said, a reassuring smile on his face. "Then let's make sure you and your brother are safe. Plans in motion." Amir shifted nervously in his chair, unsure if he had done the right thing by opening up about his home life. He hadn't told anyone before, not even his teachers or the kind old lady who lived 2 houses down. But Mr. Carlton's expression wasn't one of pity, it was one of resolve, as though he had already started figuring out a solution. "Amir," Mr. Carlton said, setting his teacup down gently, "I used to work for the government. Let's just say I have some experience dealing with situations like yours. If these men are dangerous, then your safety is my priority. Yours and your brother's." Amir's eyes widened. "You worked for the government? Like the police?" "Not quite," Mr. Carlton replied with a faint smile. "More like the FBI. I retired a few years ago, but I still have connections." He leaned forward, his tone serious but calm. "The first thing we need to do is make sure you and Malik are protected. Do these men ever leave the house?" Amir shook his head. "Not for long. They stay most of the time, eating our food and watching TV. Sometimes they go out at night, but I don't know where they go." Mr. Carlton frowned. "And Malik, he's working, isn't he? How does he feel about all of this?" "He's scared," Amir admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "He tries to act tough, but I know he's worried. He told me once that if we call the police, they might hurt us." Mr. Carlton's jaw tightened. That won't happen. Not if we act carefully. He stood up, pacing the room with an energy that belied his age. Amir, I need to make a few phone calls. But before I do, I want to make sure you feel okay about this. It's a big step. Amir hesitated. His whole life, he had been taught to avoid drawing attention to their family's problems. But now, sitting in this grand house with someone who seemed genuinely willing to help, he felt a flicker of courage. I just want us to be safe, Amir said finally. Whatever it takes. Mr. Carlton nodded, a look of approval crossing his face. Good. Stay here for a moment, and help yourself to more tea or cookies if you'd like. He paused, then added with a wink, the cookies are homemade. My housekeeper, Mrs. Willis, is quite proud of them. Amir managed a small smile as Mr. Carlton left the room. He leaned back in the plush chair, feeling both nervous and relieved. It was strange to think that someone who lived in a house like this cared about his problems. For so long, it had felt like he and Malik were invisible, just two kids trying to survive in a world that seemed to forget they existed. In the next room, Mr. Carlton picked up his phone and scrolled through his contacts. His fingers paused over a familiar name, Agent Jake Foster. It had been years since they'd worked together, but Jake was someone Mr. Carlton trusted implicitly. The call rang twice before Jake answered. Harlan. Long time no hear. What's going on? Jake, I need a favor, Mr. Carlton said, his tone firm. It's about a young boy and his brother. They're in trouble, and I think it's worse than it seems. What kind of trouble? Jake's voice immediately became serious. They've got 3 men squatting in their home. Criminals, from what I can gather. The men have guns, and they've been talking about stolen goods. I need to know if there's already a case on these guys, or if we need to start one. Jake whistled softly. That's a lot to unpack. Do you have names? Not yet, but I'll get them, Mr. Carlton said. Right now, I need to make sure the boys are safe. If we move too fast, we might put them in more danger. Understood, Jake said. Send me what you've got, and I'll start digging. We'll figure this out. Thanks, Jake, Mr. Carlton said. I owe you. Just like old times, Jake replied with a chuckle. You know I'm always here to help. Mr. Carlton ended the call and took a deep breath. His mind was racing with possibilities, but he knew he had to tread carefully. The last thing he wanted was to scare Amir or make things worse for him and Malik. For now, he would gather as much information as possible and trust Jake to do the rest. When Mr. Carlton returned to the sitting room, he found Amir staring out the window, lost in thought. The boy turned quickly when he heard footsteps, his eyes wide with a mix of curiosity and anxiety. Amir, Mr. Carlton said gently, I've spoken to a friend of mine who works in law enforcement. He's going to help us, but I'll need to ask you a few more questions. Amir nodded. Okay. Do you know the names of the men in your house? Or anything about them? What they talk about? What they do? Amir thought for a moment, then shook his head. They never say their real names, I think. They call each other by nicknames, like Big Ron and Ace. They don't talk much when I'm around, but I heard them once talking about a job. Something about moving stuff they stole. Mr. Carlton's expression darkened. That's helpful, Amir. You're doing great. Do you think you could describe them to someone, like a sketch artist? Maybe, Amir said hesitantly. I don't know if I'm good at that. You don't have to be perfect, Mr. Carlton reassured him. Anything you can remember will help. Amir nodded, his trust in Mr. Carlton growing with every word. For the first time in a long while, he felt like someone was truly on his side. As they talked, Mr. Carlton couldn't help but admire the boy's bravery. Amir might have been scared, but he was also resilient, willing to face danger if it meant protecting his brother. It was a kind of courage that Mr. Carlton had seen before, during his years in the FBI, and it only strengthened his resolve to help. By the time Amir left the mansion, Mr. Carlton had a plan in place. Jake and his team would start investigating the men in Amir's house, while Mr. Carlton kept close contact with the boy and his brother. It would take careful coordination, but Mr. Carlton was determined to see it through. As Amir walked home, he felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The wallet in his backpack was gone, but in its place was something far more valuable: hope. For the first time in months, Amir believed that things might actually get better. Little did he know, the events set into motion by his visit to Mr. Carlton's house would soon spiral into something far bigger than he could have imagined. And when the FBI came knocking on his door, it would be the beginning of a new chapter in his life, one filled with challenges, revelations, and the promise of a brighter future. A knock at the door. Amir's house felt heavier than usual when he returned that afternoon. The sound of the men arguing over a card game in the living room seeped through the walls, and Malik's exhausted expression at the kitchen table spoke volumes. Amir approached quietly, setting his backpack down and slipping into the seat across from his brother. "How was school?" Malik asked without looking up from the stack of bills he was calculating. "It was okay," Amir said, his voice low. He debated whether to tell Malik about his visit to Mr. Carlton's mansion, but decided against it. Malik had enough to worry about without the added stress of Amir's secret mission. The evening passed uneventfully, though tension simmered under the surface as always. The three men, Vigran, Ace, and Marco, were louder than usual, their gruff voices filling the house. Amir tried to tune them out, retreating to his small room to do his homework. That night, as Amir lay in bed, he found himself thinking about Mr. Carlton. The man's calm confidence had left an impression on him, and Amir clung to the hope that help was coming. For the first time in months, he prayed not out of desperation, but out of gratitude. The next morning dawned cloudy and cold. Malik was already gone for work when Amir woke up, leaving him to navigate the house alone. The men were still asleep, their snores rumbling through the thin walls. Amir made himself a quick breakfast, careful not to make too much noise, and left for school. The day passed uneventfully until Amir returned home. He had just stepped inside the house when a loud knock echoed through the thin walls. "Open up, FBI." A voice boomed from outside. Amir froze, his heart pounding. He looked toward the living room, where Big Ron and Ace were already scrambling to their feet. Marco stumbled out of the kitchen, cursing under his breath. "What the hell is this?" Big Ron snarled, his hand darting toward the waistband of his jeans. Amir's stomach dropped. Was he reaching for a weapon? "Get the door," Ace barked at Amir, his eyes flashing with anger. Amir hesitated, panic gripping him. Before he could move, the door burst open, and a group of FBI agents flooded the small house. They moved with precision, their weapons drawn but pointed down, their voices calm but commanding. "Hands where we can see them," one agent shouted. Big Ron lunged toward the back door, but two agents intercepted him, wrestling him to the ground. Marco tried to follow, but he stumbled over a chair and was immediately restrained. Ace raised his hand slowly, his eyes darting around the room. Amir pressed himself against the wall, trembling. He didn't know where to look or what to do. "Amir Johnson," a voice called. Amir turned to see a tall woman in a dark suit standing in the doorway. Her badge glinted in the dim light, and her expression was serious but kind. "Yes," Amir said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Agent Thompson." The woman said, "You're safe now. Everything's going to be okay." Safe. The word echoed in Amir's mind, and he felt a wave of relief so powerful it left him lightheaded. The agents moved quickly, securing the three men and escorting them out of the house in handcuffs. The sound of their angry protests faded as they were loaded into waiting vehicles outside. Agent Thompson stayed behind, her attention focused on Amir. She knelt down to his level, her expression softening. "Are you okay?" Amir nodded, though his legs felt like jelly. "Is your brother here?" "No," Amir said. "He's at work." Agent Thompson stood and exchanged a glance with another agent, a tall man who looked as though he'd been through countless missions like this one. The man nodded and stepped outside, pulling out his phone. Just then, Amir heard familiar footsteps approaching. He turned to see Mr. Carlton stepping into the house, his presence a welcome anchor in the chaos. "Amir," Mr. Carlton said warmly, his eyes full of concern. "Are you all right?" Amir nodded again, this time with more confidence. "You really did it," he said, his voice filled with wonder. Mr. Carlton smiled. "I told you I would." As the agents began to clear out, Amir noticed Malik approaching the house. His older brother's expression was a mix of confusion and fear as he spotted the FBI vehicles parked outside. "What's going on?" Malik demanded, rushing toward the front door. "It's okay, Malik," Amir said quickly, stepping outside to meet him. "They're here to help." Malik stared at his little brother, then at the agents. His shoulders slumped, and he let out a shaky breath. "I didn't know what to do," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I didn't know how to make them leave." "It's not your fault," Agent Thompson said gently, stepping forward. "You did what you had to do to keep Amir safe. That's what matters." Malik nodded, though tears glistened in his eyes. He reached out and pulled Amir into a tight hug, holding him as though he might disappear. As the situation settled, Mr. Carlton approached the brothers. "You two are incredibly brave," he said. "And now, you're not alone anymore. Things are going to get better." For the first time in what felt like forever, Amir believed him. That evening, as Amir and Malik sat together in the now empty house, they felt a strange combination of exhaustion and hope. The house was still the same, small, worn, and full of memories. But it felt lighter without the oppressive presence of the three men. "We're going to be okay," Malik said, his voice steady for the first time in months. "Yeah," Amir agreed, a small smile tugging at his lips. Outside, the night was quiet, and the stars shone brighter than Amir could ever remember. For the first time, he let himself imagine a future free from fear, one where he and Malik could finally start to rebuild their lives. And as he drifted off to sleep that night, Amir whispered a prayer of gratitude. Hope had finally found its way into their home. A new dawn and unanswered questions. The morning after the FBI raid, Amir woke up to a strange sensation. Peace. For the first time in months, the house was quiet, truly quiet. No muffled arguments, no harsh laughter, no heavy footsteps pacing the floors. The absence of chaos was almost startling. Amir sat up in his small bed, letting the events of the previous day wash over him. The image of the three men being led out in handcuffs played in his mind, and he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Safety. In the kitchen, Malik was already up, sitting at the table with a steaming cup of coffee in his hands. His posture was relaxed for the first time in months, and a faint smile tugged at the corners of his mouth when Amir walked in. "Morning, kid," Malik said, his voice lighter than Amir had heard in a long while. "Morning," Amir replied, sliding into the chair across from his brother. For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, the sunlight streaming through the small window casting a warm glow over the table. "I can't believe they're gone," Malik said finally, shaking his head. "I've been so scared for so long. I didn't think we'd ever get out of it." Amir hesitated, unsure if he should reveal the full story. But after a moment, he decided Malik deserved to know. "I didn't tell you before," Amir began, his voice low. "But I met someone, Mr. Carlton. I found his wallet and gave it back to him. He's the one who called the FBI. He said he wanted to help us." Malik looked at Amir, his brow furrowing in surprise. "You're telling me that guy from yesterday, the one standing with the FBI, he's the one who made this happen?" Amir nodded. "He used to work for them, I think. He said he has connections." Malik leaned back in his chair, exhaling sharply. "Wow. I don't know what to say. I mean, how did we get so lucky? A stranger just decides to help us. Amr shrugged. I think it was more than luck. I think it was. I don't know. Maybe God heard my prayers. Malik smiled faintly, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Well, whoever he is, we owe him a lot. Later that morning, a knock at the door interrupted their quiet breakfast. Malik stiffened instinctively, but Amir placed a reassuring hand on his arm. It's okay, Amir said. It's probably Mr. Carlton. Sure enough, when Malik opened the door, Mr. Carlton stood there with a kind smile on his face. Behind him was Agent Thompson, carrying a small folder. Good morning, Mr. Carlton said warmly. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all, Malik replied, though his voice was tinged with uncertainty. Please come in. As the two visitors stepped inside, Amir noticed how out of place they looked in the small, worn-down house. Mr. Carlton's polished demeanor and Agent Thompson's sharp professionalism seemed like they belonged to a different world. They sat down at the table, and Agent Thompson opened the folder, placing a few papers in front of Malik and Amir. I wanted to update you on what's happening, Agent Thompson began. The three men we arrested yesterday, Ronald Big Ron Sanders, Anthony Ace Martinez, and Marco Russo, are part of a larger organized crime ring. They've been under investigation for months, but this is the first time we've been able to catch them with enough evidence to prosecute. Malik's eyes widened. A crime ring. You're saying they're part of some bigger operation? Agent Thompson nodded. Yes, they've been involved in everything from theft to illegal weapons sales. Your house was being used as a safe haven for their activities, but we've recovered stolen goods and other evidence that ties them to multiple crimes. Thanks to Amir's information and Mr. Carlton's quick action, we were able to move in before they could relocate. Amir listened intently, a mix of relief and unease settling over him. While he was glad the men were gone, the idea that their house had been part of something so dangerous was unsettling. What happens now? Malik asked, his voice steady but cautious. For now, you're safe, Agent Thompson said. We'll have patrols in the area to make sure there's no retaliation, though we believe the arrests will send a strong message to their associates. As for your living situation, she hesitated, glancing at Mr. Carlton. I'd like to help with that, Mr. Carlton said, his voice gentle but firm. Amir told me a little about your struggles. I know you've been through more than most people should ever have to face. If you're open to it, I'd like to offer some assistance. Malik frowned slightly. What kind of assistance? I have connections with a few programs that help families in situations like yours, Mr. Carlton explained. They can provide financial support, legal advice, and even help you find a better place to live. But I also want to help personally. Consider it my way of paying it forward. Malik hesitated, glancing at Amir. The idea of accepting help from a stranger was both appealing and daunting. I don't want to sound ungrateful, Malik said slowly. But why? Why would you go out of your way for us? Mr. Carlton leaned forward, his expression earnest. Because someone once did the same for me, he said quietly. When I was young, my family went through a difficult time. A stranger helped us when we had nowhere else to turn. I've never forgotten that. And when Amir showed up at my house, returning my wallet instead of keeping the money inside, I saw the kind of integrity and courage that reminded me of my own family. It felt right to help. Malik nodded slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing. Okay, he said finally. We'll accept your help, but only if we can find a way to pay you back someday. Mr. Carlton smiled. There's no debt here, Malik. Just take care of your brother and keep moving forward. That's payment enough. After Mr. Carlton and Agent Thompson left, the house felt different. The shadows of fear that had loomed over every corner seemed to lift, replaced by a cautious optimism. Malik sat down at the table again, running a hand through his hair. You know, he said, looking at Amir, I think this might be the first time I felt hopeful, like we might actually get through this. Amir smiled. Me too. The day passed in a haze of small steps forward. Malik made calls to some of the programs Mr. Carlton had mentioned, while Amir helped tidy the house. It wasn't much, but it was theirs again. And that made all the difference. As evening fell, Malik and Amir sat together on the couch, watching an old movie on their small TV. For the first time in what felt like forever, they laughed together, the weight of their struggles momentarily forgotten. Neither of them knew what the future held, but for now, they were content to take it one day at a time. And in the quiet of the night, Amir whispered a prayer of gratitude, thanking God not just for their safety, but for the strangers who had stepped into their lives when they needed it most. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they weren't walking it alone anymore. And for the Johnson brothers, that made all the difference. The road to healing. As the hours passed, Amir couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed in such a short amount of time. Just 2 days ago, he had felt trapped in a situation that seemed impossible to escape. Now the house felt lighter, almost unfamiliar without the constant tension that had clung to every room like a shadow. Malik sat at the table, filling out paperwork that Mr. Carlton had sent over from one of the assistance programs. It felt strange to see his brother focused on something other than keeping the peace with the men who had once dominated their home. "You know," Malik said suddenly, breaking the silence, "I was so scared for you, Amir. Every day, I worried about what they might do, if they'd hurt you or worse. And I didn't know how to stop it." Amar looked up from the small notebook where he had been doodling. "You didn't let them hurt me," he said softly. "You did the best you could, and now they're gone." Malik's eyes softened, and he nodded. "Yeah, but I can't stop thinking about how close we came to losing everything. Those guys, they were dangerous. I should have seen it sooner." Amr hesitated, then said, "You were just trying to help, Malik. You didn't know what they were really like at first." The brothers fell into a thoughtful silence. For Amir, the fear that had gripped their lives still felt fresh, but for the first time, it wasn't an overwhelming weight. Instead, it was like a scar, a reminder of the past, but no longer a threat to their future. Later that afternoon, Mr. Carlton returned with more updates. This time, he came with a young woman named Clara, a social worker who specialized in helping families rebuild after crisis. She had a kind smile and an easy demeanor that immediately put Amir at ease. "Hi, Amir," Clara said as she sat down with them. "I've heard a lot about you from Mr. Carlton. He told me how brave you've been through all of this." Amir blushed slightly and looked down at his hands. "I just did what I thought was right," he said quietly. "And that's exactly what makes you brave," Clara said with a warm smile. She turned to Malik, spreading a few brochures and forms across the table. "I'm here to help you figure out the next steps. There are resources available to help you both, whether it's finding a new place to live, covering expenses, or even getting counseling to process everything you've been through." Malik nodded, his expression cautious but hopeful. "Counseling. It's completely up to you," Clara said gently. "But after everything you've been through, it might help to have someone to talk to. It's not just about what happened with those men. It's about making sure you and Amir feel safe and supported moving forward." Amir listened quietly, unsure how he felt about the idea of counseling. The thought of talking to a stranger about his fears made him uncomfortable, but he couldn't deny that a part of him longed to let go of the burden he'd been carrying. "We'll think about it," Malik said, glancing at Amir for confirmation. Amir nodded, trusting his brother to make the right decision for them both. Over the next few days, the Johnson brothers began to adjust to their new reality. Clara worked tirelessly to connect them with resources, while Mr. Carlton remained a steady presence, checking in often and offering advice. One afternoon, Mr. Carlton took Amir aside and handed him a small envelope. "What's this?" Amir asked, turning the envelope over in his hands. "Open it," Mr. Carlton said with a smile. Inside was a gift card for a local bookstore. Amir's eyes widened, and he looked up at Mr. Carlton in surprise. I remember you telling me how much you like to read, Mr. Carlton explained. I thought you might enjoy picking out a few books of your own. Amir felt a lump rise in his throat. Thank you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You've earned it, Amir, Mr. Carlton said. You've been through so much, and you've handled it with more courage than most adults I know. I wanted to do something to remind you that there's still a lot of good in the world. Amir clutched the envelope tightly, a smile spreading across his face. For so long, his world had felt small and dark, but now, it felt like it was beginning to open up again. That evening, Malik and Amir sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The air was cool, and the faint hum of distant traffic created a soothing backdrop. Do you think we'll ever feel normal again? Amir asked, breaking the silence. Malik thought for a moment before replying. I don't know if things will ever go back to the way they were, he admitted, but I think we can build something better. It'll take time, but we've got people on our side now. We're not alone anymore. Amir nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He believed his brother, but more importantly, he believed in the strength they had found together. As the first stars appeared in the sky, Amir felt a sense of peace settle over him. The scars of their past would always be there, but they no longer defined him. And for the first time in what felt like forever, he looked forward to what tomorrow might bring. Rebuilding and redemption. The days following the raid passed in a blur for Amir and Malik. Their once chaotic home was now a place of quiet, and for the first time in years, they could begin to rebuild. But the transition wasn't easy. The silence that had once seemed comforting began to feel heavy, filled with unspoken fears and lingering questions about their future. Malik spent most of his time juggling work and meetings with Clara, the social worker who had taken their case. She had arranged for temporary financial assistance and was helping them explore housing options. While Malik remained cautious, Amir could see a spark of hope in his brother's eyes that hadn't been there in a long time. Amir, on the other hand, found himself with more free time than he knew what to do with. His afternoons, once spent tiptoeing around the men who had invaded their home, were now his own. He wandered the neighborhood, finding solace in the familiar streets and daydreaming about the bookstore gift card Mr. Carlton had given him. Books had always been his escape, a world where he could lose himself and forget the troubles waiting for him at home. Now they felt like a bridge to something new, a life where he could dream beyond survival. One afternoon, Amir decided to visit the bookstore. The shop was small and cozy, its shelves crammed with books of all shapes and sizes. The scent of paper and ink filled the air, and soft music played in the background. Amir wandered through the aisles, his fingers brushing against the spines of books as he searched for something that called to him. As he browsed, he thought about Mr. Carlton. The man had been a lifeline, stepping in when Amir and Malik were at their lowest. But more than that, he had become a mentor of sorts, someone who saw potential in Amir that even Amir hadn't known he possessed. After much deliberation, Amir chose 3 books, one about space exploration, another about a boy who overcame impossible odds, and a mystery novel. As he paid with the gift card, he felt a strange sense of accomplishment, as though each book was a step toward reclaiming a part of himself. That evening, Amir sat on the floor of his bedroom, surrounded by his new books. He opened the first one, immersing himself in the story of a young boy who defied the odds to achieve greatness. The parallels to his own life weren't lost on him, and he felt a flicker of determination. As he read, a knock on the door startled him. Malik appeared in the doorway, a cautious smile on his face. "Hey," Malik said. "I just got off the phone with Clara. She said there's a program that can help us move into a better neighborhood. We might even be able to get a place closer to your school." Amar looked up, his eyes wide. "Really? When?" "Soon," Malik said. "We still have to work out the details, but it's a start." Amir felt a wave of relief wash over him. For so long, the idea of leaving their neighborhood had felt like an impossible dream. Now, It was within reach. The next day, Mr. Carlton visited again. This time, he brought a stack of papers and a warm smile. "I've been thinking," Mr. Carlton said as he sat down at their kitchen table. "You both have shown incredible resilience, but I know rebuilding takes more than just a safe home. I wanted to share an opportunity with you, Malik." Malik frowned slightly, his curiosity piqued. "What kind of opportunity?" "There's a training program I know of," Mr. Carlton explained. "It's designed for people who face difficult circumstances and want to build new skills. They offer courses in everything from business management to technical trades. It's fully funded, and I think you'd be a great fit." Malik hesitated, his brow furrowed. "I don't know. I've got my job, and Amir needs me." "Your job will always be there," Mr. Carlton said gently. "But this could be a chance to build something more stable, not just for you but for Amir too. You've done so much for him already. Maybe it's time to think about what you need." Amir watched his brother closely, sensing the internal struggle. Malik had always put Amir first, sacrificing his own dreams to ensure they had a roof over their heads. But now, the prospect of something better dangled in front of him, and Amir could see the hope flickering behind his brother's cautious expression. "You should do it," Amir said softly. "I'll be okay. And if it helps us both, then it's worth it." Malik looked at Amir, his eyes filled with a mix of pride and gratitude. "You're sure?" Amir nodded. "Yeah, you deserve this." Over the next few weeks, their lives began to shift in ways they hadn't expected. Malik enrolled in the training program, spending his evenings at classes, while Clara helped them finalize plans to move to a new apartment. Amir returned to school with a renewed sense of purpose, his days no longer clouded by fear. One afternoon, as Amir walked home from school, he spotted Mr. Carlton standing outside their house. The older man smiled when he saw Amir and waved him over. "Amir," Mr. Carlton said, "I have something for you." Amir's curiosity was piqued as Mr. Carlton handed him a small, neatly wrapped package. Inside was a leather-bound journal with Amir's name embossed on the cover. "I thought you might like to start writing," Mr. Carlton said. "You've got a story worth telling, and sometimes putting it down on paper can help you make sense of it all." Amir held the journal tightly, his heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you," he said. "I'll try." "Don't just try," Mr. Carlton said with a wink. "Do it. You've got more strength and wisdom than most people twice your age. I can't wait to see what you create." That evening, Amir sat at his desk, staring at the blank pages of the journal. For a long time, he didn't know where to start. But then, he thought about everything that had happened. The wallet, the raid, the new opportunities that had come their way. Slowly, he began to write. He wrote about the fear he had felt living under the shadow of the men who had invaded their home, about the hope that had blossomed when Mr. Carlton entered their lives, and about the quiet determination that now guided him and Malik as they rebuilt their future. As the words flowed onto the page, Amir felt a sense of clarity and empowerment. This was his story, and for the first time, he realized he had the power to shape its ending. The past might have been filled with hardship, but the future was a blank canvas, and Amir was ready to fill it with possibility. The future beckons. The sun rose over their neighborhood, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold. For the Johnson brothers, it marked the first morning in their new apartment. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and new beginnings, and the quiet was a comforting contrast to the chaos they had left behind. Amir stood in his small room, unpacking a box of books onto a second-hand shelf Malik had found at a thrift store. Each book felt like a piece of his past that had helped carry him to this new chapter. The leather-bound journal Mr. Carlton had given him sat on his desk, its pages already filled with scribbled thoughts and stories inspired by his life. "Hey, you almost done in there?" Malik called from the living room. "Almost," Amir replied, stacking the last of his books. When Amir joined Malik in the living room, he was struck by how different his brother looked. Malik's posture was more relaxed, his face no longer etched with worry lines. He wore a crisp shirt, a stark contrast to the worn-out work clothes he had lived in for years. "You look happy," Amir said, a grin spreading across his face. Malik laughed. "I feel happy," he admitted. "This new job, they're actually treating me like I matter. I never thought I'd say this, but going back to school was the best decision I've ever made." Amir sat down beside him on their old couch, which looked oddly out of place in the freshly painted apartment. "What's it like?" he asked. "The program, I mean." "It's tough, but it's worth it," Malik said. "I'm learning so much, stuff I can actually use to build a career. And the people there, they get it. They've been through hard times too. It's not just about the classes, it's about believing in yourself again." Amir nodded thoughtfully. He was proud of Malik, not just for taking the leap but for thriving in a way neither of them had thought possible a few months ago. Later that afternoon, they had a visitor. Mr. Carlton arrived, carrying a small box wrapped in brown paper. Amir opened the door, his face lighting up when he saw the familiar figure. "Mr. Carlton," Amir exclaimed. "Come in." Mr. Carlton stepped inside, his eyes scanning the apartment with approval. "This looks wonderful," he said. "How are you two settling in?" "It's perfect," Malik said, shaking Mr. Carlton's hand. "We can't thank you enough for everything you've done for us." "I didn't do it alone," Mr. Carlton said modestly. "You two did the hard work. I just pointed you in the right direction." He turned to Amir and handed him the box. "This is for you, Amir. A little something to celebrate your new home." Amir carefully unwrapped the box, revealing a sleek digital camera. His eyes widened in surprise, and he looked up at Mr. Carlton in disbelief. "You said you loved telling stories," Mr. Carlton explained. "I thought maybe you'd like to try telling them in pictures too." Amir's hands trembled as he held the camera. "This is amazing," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you. Just promise me you'll use it," Mr. Carlton said with a wink. That evening, Amir ventured out with his new camera. The neighborhood was bustling with activity, children playing in the park, street vendors selling snacks, and families enjoying the cool evening air. Amir began snapping pictures, capturing moments that felt alive and full of hope. He photographed the old man who sold balloons at the corner, his weathered face breaking into a toothy grin. He captured the golden glow of the sunset reflecting off the windows of a nearby building. As he clicked the shutter, Amir felt a spark of inspiration he hadn't experienced before. The camera wasn't just a gift, it was a tool to show the world through his eyes. When Amir returned home, Malik was in the kitchen, cooking dinner. The apartment smelled of garlic and spices, and Amir's stomach growled at the familiar scent. "Where'd you go?" Malik asked as he stirred a pot on the stove. "Took some pictures," Amir replied, setting the camera on the counter. "I think I'm getting the hang of it." Malik glanced at the camera and smiled. "You always had an eye for things, even when we didn't have much to look at. Maybe this is your thing." Amir grinned. "Maybe it is." They ate dinner together at the small table, talking and laughing in a way that felt easy and natural. For the first time in years, the weight of their struggles felt like a distant memory. In the weeks that followed, Amir threw himself into photography and writing. He spent his afternoons capturing moments around the neighborhood and his evenings pouring his thoughts into his journal. Malik encouraged him every step of the way, often looking through Amir's photos and marveling at his talent. One day, Clara stopped by to check in on them. As she sipped tea in their living room, she noticed Amir's journal sitting on the coffee table. "Is this yours?" Clara asked, picking it up. Amir nodded, suddenly self-conscious. "Yeah, it's just some stuff I've been writing." Clara flipped through the pages, her eyes widening as she read. "Amir, this is incredible," she said. "Have you ever thought about sharing your story with others?" Amir shrugged. "I don't know if anyone would care." "I think a lot of people would care," Clara said. Your story is powerful, and it could inspire others who are going through tough times." The idea planted itself in Amir's mind, and over the next few days, he began organizing his journal into a cohesive narrative. He included stories about the hardships he and Malik had faced, the people who had helped them, and the hope that had carried them through. Months later, Amir stood nervously in front of a small crowd at a local community center. Clara had arranged for him to speak at an event for at-risk youth, and Amir had reluctantly agreed. Now, as he faced the audience, he took a deep breath and began. "My name is Amir Johnson," he said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "A year ago, I thought my life would never get better. My brother and I were trapped in a situation that felt hopeless. But then, something happened. Someone believed in us, and that changed everything." As Amir shared his story, he noticed the faces in the crowd. Young people who looked just as scared and lost as he had once felt. But by the end, he saw something else: hope. When he finished, the room erupted into applause. Malik was in the back, clapping louder than anyone else. And standing beside him was Mr. Carlton, his eyes shining with pride. Amir stepped off the stage, his heart full. For the first time, he realized that his journey wasn't just about survival. It was about making a difference. And as he looked at the smiling faces around him, he knew he was ready to face whatever the future held. Because no matter what came next, he and Malik had already proven that they could overcome anything together.